Okay, it's time for us to get started. Today we're going to begin speaking. We've been talking about the elder and his family, but today we're moving on now to the elder and his reputation. And just like the family, there will be several lessons that come out of this material. Just to review a little bit, last week we talked the whole time about children and how many children that meant. An important consideration is that nowhere in Scripture is it insinuated or taught that a man with 2 or more children is a more competent leader than a man with just 1 child. The word children is sometimes used when only 1 child is under consideration. For example, if you only have 1 child and someone says, "Do you have any children?" you would still answer that question, yes. And that happened in the Scripture. We looked specifically at the passage in Genesis where Sarah said, I'm paraphrasing, but basically, who would have thought God would have given me children to nurse, and she had just the 1 child. And I was thinking about this some more over the weekend, and of course God created language as well as everything else, and if he had felt the need to be more specific, he would have been more specific, I believe, because God in his power could make it as clear as he felt that it needed to be. So if more than 1 child was a definite requirement, I feel like he would have said more than 1 child, because I think he could easily anticipate these kind of discussions that people have been having for centuries now about children and how many children and things. That's just a personal opinion. But and then we spent some time looking at 1 Timothy chapter 5, verses 3 through 10. That is the section that talks about a particular type or class of widows called widows indeed. And they were very specific, and this is kind of what I'm talking about. God was very specific here on what met the requirement for a widow indeed. And one of the things was, first of all, she had to be 60 or older, and she had to have absolutely no one else, family-wise, to take care of her, no children, okay, or grandchildren. So even if she had just 1 child, that meets the requirement of children. So that kind of helps solidify. Anybody have any insights? Anybody? I said that last week. I don't want to use the same material all the time. I said a vision. I'll say it. Did anyone get a revelation during the week that cleared this all up for us? Or read anything? Okay. And again, I'll keep saying this all throughout the study. When we have names before us and you're asked to consider specific folks, that you have to make up your own mind. Wanda?
Is this talking about the church itself helping a widow, or would it be okay for individual members of the church?
Well, you can do whatever you want to, right?
We're talking about taking church and helping widows.
And like Jeremy mentioned last week, if we had a woman that became a widow and was 58, right? If she needed some help just to get on her feet and sort of, but we're talking, and I have never known, and I've been in the church all my life, I have never known a widow indeed. I have never known of a widow that was being taken care of by the church. Has anybody ever?
Well, we have Social Security and stuff that they didn't have back then too, because women didn't work and pay in.
Right. We have a lot of social nets, safety nets.
They had family was
in place. Right. And I think we made that point last week too. Our culture, our family structures, our social structures, they're all just very much different than they were at the time that these things were written. Now, I would say, because Jeremy and I experienced this at one place that we attended together, I think the church does have an obligation to help, and there are some brethren that just want to too quickly say, you've got insurance, you've got Social Security, go help yourself, kind of a attitude. Am I expressing that more or less accurately?
We've had people that were so parsimonious, I guess, that they would look at a clear, scripturally approved, benevolent act and say that it was robbing the church. Well, you're not robbing anything when you use funds for the purpose that they were set aside for. That's why we laid those funds aside.
Yeah. So,
Ashton had come. Look behind you.
what?
I was going to point
sorry.
out, it says, the wording there is something like, let her not be taken into the number. And it was a specific program that they had. This wasn't to say you couldn't help anybody that didn't, fit this, but for this program, these are the guidelines.
Right. And we're talking like long-term care
Right.
type situation. And today, despite all the kind of the negative changes to our society and culture, programs like health insurance and Social Security and pensions have helped, I think, so that, but again, I wouldn't want to stand before God and said, God, she had Social Security and she had her husband's pension, and and I have to explain to him why we didn't help, So, but anyway, that's a whole. We're just starting to follow a rabbit trail. So, let's pull back to where we are. So, again, having children merely clarifies the kind of household over which the man rules, okay? A household with children as opposed to a household without children. All right, so moving on to the elder and his reputation. There are several things under consideration under that idea of his reputation. The first being an elder must be blameless. 1 Timothy 3:2. This is said 3 times in Scripture, this idea of being blameless, and they're just in 2 verses. A bishop then must be blameless, the husband of one wife, etc. And then Titus 1, it says it twice within the same couple of passages. If a man is blameless, the husband of wife, having faithful children, not accused of dissipation or insubordination, for a bishop must be blameless as a steward of God. Okay? The Greek word, if you're interested, anapilatos, which means above, or is translated above reproach in several of the popular translations, literally means to lay hold upon. Okay, something that you could, I guess, the idea of accuse someone of and it stick. Okay. So in this context, you're trying to seize someone's character by some sort of unjustified censure of their character. And when the matter is revealed in its full context, you find out that it's groundless. There are no grounds for the accusations. There's an awful, because of the time of year or the time of the, we're in that transition period to a new administration. This seems to happen every 4 years. The president-elect starts making their cabinet announcements, and here comes all the skeletons right out of the closet. People all say, well, when he was 12 years old, he did this, and all this kind of stuff. And that's kind of the idea. Just all this wild stuff is just dug up and throw out of there. And for an elder, it can't stick.
It helps if it's not true, which is why this is important.
Okay. So, some other translations say a man of irreproachable character, impeccable character, without fault. kind of the idea like if you heard an accusation against an individual like this, your first thought would, you got to be kidding me, or you got to be out of your mind. There is no way that so-and-so would ever do anything like that. Okay? I liked this from Synonyms of the New Testament: affording nothing that an adversary could use as the basis for an accusation. Okay? Now, here's an important part, though. The first trait mentioned is the bishop should be above reproach. This does not mean that he should be sinless, but that his conduct and action should be seen by the congregation as blameless. Okay? If sinless was the requirement, would we have any elders? We wouldn't have anybody doing anything, right? If sinless was the requirement, okay? Who is, I hate to use the word famous, but I'll say well-known. Who is a well-known elder from the scriptures? Peter, right? Was Peter sinless? Absolutely not. Not only an elder, but an apostle. He was not sinless, and his sins are recorded there for all of time to read about, okay? And yet he served as an elder. And the idea, though, is the elder is not supposed to bring shame or reproach, and Peter did not do that. One more that I like, the term anapileptos is used to describe someone who is beyond criticism or reproach, someone whose character and conduct are irreproachable. In the New Testament, it's often used in the context of qualifications for church leaders, emphasizing the importance of a life that is free from scandal or legitimate accusation. Yeah, there are lots of well-known people that have reputations as a bad boy, right? And you hear something about them, and it doesn't surprise you at all, right? Who's the dude that's in so much Diddy, P. Diddy, whatever his name, what is his real name? I don't even know. It was Sean Combs, I think. But he already had a reputation, didn't he? I mean, if you just, wasn't he a rapper? Or is he just a music producer? I think he was a rapper too. Yeah, you listen to that genre of entertainment. I hesitate to call it music, but entertainment. I mean, that is what it leans toward anyway, right? So I would say if you choose to perform in that vein, you're crafting that reputation already yourself, right? So he already had that going for him, and now all these really crazy things are being said, and he's in jail. And is anyone surprised? I don't think so. I don't read anything about him really, but I haven't even seen a headline go by that says, "I am so shocked that they would say this about Diddy." You know? So that's the kind of thing. We don't want a person, and I skipped right over it. We mentioned this last week. Did Jesus complete his ministry without ever being accused? No, he was accused all the time. It was like a hobby, right? It's like the Pharisees sat around and filled out their day planners or something. Who's going to accuse Jesus today of something, right? It was like just the regular group pastime to accuse him, but none of it was ever valid. It couldn't stick. So we can't stop the charges. Well, let me say this. A person would really have to do some self-examination and decide on how ridiculous will I look if I make this charge against a person with this obviously fine character, you know. Now, there are people that would go there anyway, as the Pharisees showed. Okay, any thoughts about that? Blameless?
Daniel's a good example.
Who?
Daniel's a good example.
Okay.
People who are scheming against him decide they want to try to take him down. I mean, they sit around scratching their heads for a good long time before they're like, we can't get anything to stick to this guy, we're going to have to go at him through attack him through his religion.
Right. Which is kind of what they did with Jesus too, right? Jesus didn't go hang out in the taverns and the bad. Well, I won't say he didn't go to the bad side of the town, but not for those purposes, you know. So that, yeah, he is a good example. All right.
Another
Go ahead.
thought, just that I think that Peter's thoughts are good. In 1 Peter 3, he says, "Now who is there to harm you if you are zealous for what is good? But even if you should suffer for righteousness' sake, you will be blessed. Have no fear of them, nor be troubled, but in your hearts honor Christ the Lord as holy, always being prepared to make a defense to anyone who asks you for a reason for the hope that is in you. Yet do it with gentleness and respect, having a good conscience, so when you are slandered, those who revile your good behavior in Christ may be put to shame."
Okay. And again, and I keep pointing this out throughout the study, who is that directed towards? That's not written about elders, is it? That's written about Christians in general, because any one of us is able to act in such a way that will bring shame on the church, and none of us are excused for that. You know, we don't get a pass because we're not elders, right? So we have to remember these things as we go through this study. All right, the elder and his temperament. Okay, here's a true or false question to start with. If an elder does his job well, he will have perhaps frequent occasions which will try his patience. True or false? Does anyone think that that is false? Okay, you know, you would think that leading a bunch of other fellow Christians would be a piece of cake, right? Yeah. And you would be wrong, right? You would be wrong, okay? Because again, the church is made up of human beings with all of our weaknesses and foibles and bad decisions and excess baggage and all that other stuff that human beings bring to any situation that they're in, right? But an elder cannot lash out, right? Even if someone gets very upset with him, he cannot lash out with his words, definitely not with his fists. Self-control, though. Galatians chapter 5, what is recorded there in Galatians chapter 5? Fruit of the Spirit, right? Who is that for? Everybody. And that's in there too. That's in there too for us non-elder folks. But to dig into this a little bit, 1 Timothy 3 says he is not violent. Titus 1:7 says he must not be arrogant or quick-tempered or a drunkard or violent. Okay, the violent there, plague-taste. He's not a striker, given to blows, not get into fights, not a brawler. I like the last word. He's not pugnacious, right? He's not a fighter. Okay. He's also not quarrelsome. Okay. And not quarrelsome, they actually use an adjective, amicos, which means peaceable. All right, so he is peaceable. He is not quarrelsome, one who is not disposed to fight or contentious. Okay. A quarrelsome man. Have you ever met anybody, been around anybody who, it doesn't matter what the topic of conversation is, what the situation is, they're going to find fault or try to argue about any little thing? Okay. An elder cannot be that kind of person.
When I was in the Army, we would have to write up what we would call evaluations. And then the ward officers, they were always fun to write up evaluations. And one time I wrote an OER up just as a kind of a joke to show them, you know, and I didn't really turn that one in. I had another one over there, but it's just like, when coming up with an idea for a mission, I can count on warrant officer so-and-so to come up with the one little thing that won't work in that mission. Because that guy was just, no matter what plan you came up with or what idea you came up with.
That's not gonna work.
That's not gonna work.
Right. Christians, but elders in any situation, you have to look for the good, right? You have to look for the good. If you're a manager of any kind, if you're in any kind of a position of authority in your job or your career, when you're dealing with your subordinates, you have to look for the good. All right? One of the best recommendations that was ever made to me when I was in the service and moving up higher into the enlisted ranks and started having people that I was responsible for, the book was called The 1 Minute Manager. It's still available. It's a really short book, less than 100 pages. You can read it in an hour. But it said that in there, if you have to talk to somebody about their job performance, always start with the positive, right? And you can find positive things, right? But a quarrelsome person would always start with a negative, tell you everything you're doing wrong and forget to mention anything that you're doing well. So an elder not being quarrelsome, why is that such an important characteristic?
Because he would always have to win.
Say again?
He'd always have to win.
Okay.
I mean, he's the authority, so.
It doesn't make for a very harmonious body, which is what we're supposed to be.
Especially if you have two or more and they have to agree.
Right. Now, right now we have 2. We may have 3. We may have 4. Who knows? Right? And they're all still going to be humans. I'm not going to put Brady on the spot, but can you imagine that in every situation, let's say we have 4, is every situation, are they all going to be in complete agreement all the time? No, it's not, right? But a quarrelsome attitude is not going to help that situation, right? So, what temptation might arise for a man who is nominated, and I don't know if that's the right word, but that's the one, you understand what I mean by that, but not selected due to objections from some. And that may happen, right? And I'm sure it's happened lots in the past, right?
Resentment would be the first thing I would think of.
Right. Okay. A guy knows that his name's been put forward, but some folks have an objection, right? Whether the objection is warranted or not, he's got to make a choice about how he's going to behave in that situation. If he behaves in a quarrelsome way, he may prove that, okay, our not selecting you was valid. Might be a different reason, but if you're going to act childishly, then you're gonna give validity to the fact that you weren't asked to serve. Okay. Moving along in that vein, Titus also says he must not be quick-tempered. Oops. Okay. Orgilos suggests a man who is prone to anger. Okay. Most of the popular translations say quick-tempered. There's a few that say he's not hot-tempered. The King James says there he's not soon angry. So I think the idea we want to think about there is anger is not his default reaction to a situation. Now, we just spent a good long time in our study of the Proverbs talking about anger, so we're not going to deal into all that again. But here's an idea to think about. Oh, I forget what I'm doing sometimes. That word, orgilos, only appears quick-tempered right here in the New Testament. But here's what you would want to think about. How would an elder react if he was rebuked? Can an elder be rebuked? Yes, he can, because again, human being, subject to making mistakes like anybody else. And if it's a serious mistake that's going to jeopardize folks' souls, he not only can be, he should be, he better be rebuked. Now, there are steps described there in 1 Timothy 5 on how that should happen, but the elder's reaction is going to tell a lot, right? If he accepts the rebuke and says, well, he has two choices. He said, I was wrong, I'm sorry. Or he says, I understand what you're saying, but here's more information or whatever. Whatever, he cannot fly off the handle and say something like, I can't believe don't you know I'm an elder? And you're not allowed to talk to me that way, kind of a thing.
Here's an example in the Bible where Paul goes after Peter. Peter takes it pretty good.
Yeah.
Says, yeah.
Right? He said he withstood, and that was, one apostle rebuking another. So even kind of, I guess, above the level of elders. But, that language there makes it sound like it wasn't just a, hey, you might want to rethink this. It was withstood him to his face. And Peter did not, go off and start his own church or anything like that. He accepted the rebuke. Any other thoughts, Brady?
I just thought quarrelsome or quick-tempered is almost in some ways the opposite of apt to teach, because if you're faced with a problem or a situation where you don't agree, your first reaction as an elder, as a Christian, whatever, should be, let's sit down, let's figure this out, not I'm right, you're wrong. I think it's an attitude thing, and I think that's possibly the opposite of apt to teach.
Yeah. And anger can definitely interfere with your ability to deliver a clear message in a teaching situation. All right, so are people born with differences of temperament? Okay, born, we might not want to dwell on born too much because we've had some discussions, but people do have differences of temperament, don't they? Well, if they have a negative character trait, if they are quick-tempered, if they are quarrelsome, right, are they allowed to say, that's just the way I am? No Christian is allowed to say, because those are the old man, right? Those kind of behaviors and attitudes, that's the old man that we're supposed to leave down there in the grave, right? Does that mean, that doesn't mean we don't play whack-a-mole sometimes, right? Anger mole will pop his head up and we have to whack him back down, or that quarrelsome mole will whack him back down, or whatever, right? But they shouldn't describe our new character. Unfortunately, I've known of one person who is serving as an elder now, but that was his defense. If I had still been at the congregation where he is when they asked him, I would have had to object, because that was his defense for some troubling behaviors that he would show. Okay? There's plenty of passages, right? Fruit of the Spirit. Curtis?
Just a thought on is, in that statement, we deny that we are putting on Christ, because Christ was never those things, and we are to put on Christ when we are baptized.
That's an excellent point,
that's something
right?
we should rise above and to cast away and try to be more like Christ.
Right? We can't say I'm going to put on Christ except for this part right here, right? Right? We have to be clothed completely. That's an excellent point. All right? Any other thoughts on that? All right, so what must a potential elder learn about himself relative to his temperament if he is to become qualified? What did the scriptures teach us all to do to ourselves? Examine ourselves, right? Examine ourselves, right? James describes the word as a what? As a mirror, right? As a mirror. And we look into the mirror to see what's wrong. And if we see something out of place, we don't just leave it, right? We fix it. Okay? So if an elder, well, if a man's name is put forward for consideration, and then someone says, I think I have a problem because it seems to me that you are too quick-tempered, or you're quarrelsome, or you're whatever, right? What does he need to do with that information?
He needs to take it seriously. I mean, I was thinking if somebody came to you and said, listen, I think you have a problem with anger, and it makes you mad. Like that sign.
Okay. So, we cannot, none of us, whether we're one day hoping to become an elder if we can, but none of us in our Christian walk, we can't just hear something given to us in sincerity that we disagree with and just discard it, right? I mean, we need to always be self-reflecting and looking for ways to improve ourselves. All right. The elder and his money. Okay. Titus 1 says he must not be greedy for money in the New King James. Okay. His skrokardes is the Greek word. Describes the man who is willing and eager to accept dishonorable gain, and includes not only the love of money, but questionable means of getting it. Okay? He doesn't particularly care how it comes to him. Okay? Some other translations say not greedy for money, not fond of sordid gain, dishonest in business, no money grubber, not avaricious, and not greedy of filthy lucre. Or as I heard one person say, lucre. Not greedy of filthy lucre. Okay? And I read this, and I'm not quite sure that I couldn't find anything in the lexicons, or I couldn't find it used in this way, but someone had this thought. And I could see an elder doing this. I'm just not sure that and I think it would be wrong. I'm just not sure it fits this. They said the word greedy also includes those who thirst for power. Okay? Now, an elder could certainly be guilty of that. I'm just not sure that it's the same, kind of falls in the same category. This word also describes people who do not care how they make money as long as they make it. I knew of one Christian that had a farm equipment business, and this is firsthand from that Christian's mouth, so I'm not making it up. Yeah, they would sell used parts as new. Okay? And charge new part prices. That falls exactly into that right there. Right? And that's dishonest. But they didn't have a problem with it. Now, it so happens that this is a fault. This idea of making money and not caring how you make it was a particular trait of the Cretans, the people that lived on the island of Crete. Why would that be important? Why do you think it would be stressed so much?
Well, if they're making the decisions for the treasury, for one thing.
Okay. Some of our instructions are given to Timothy. Who are the other instructions given to? Titus. Where is Titus when he gets these instructions? He's in Crete. Okay. So he in particular is like, it sounds bad when we say it the way we do, but watch out for those Cretans, right? But that's what they were called. Not with the same idea necessarily. Okay. There's a Greek historian named Polybius. He said of the Cretans, they are so given to making gain in disgraceful and acquisitive ways that among the Cretans alone of all men, no gain is counted disgraceful. Okay? Yeah. It didn't matter to them how they got their money The Greek philosopher Plutarch said they stuck to money like bees to honey, the Cretans, okay? And the Cretans counted material gain far above honesty and honor. Just make the money. That's all they were about, okay? So Titus in particular, Paul would have wanted to make sure, he would have had to pay special attention, I guess, to help these people. It apparently was a characteristic of their culture. I guess the closest thing that we have to it now is politicians, right? And we've all seen those articles like, being a congressman pays $200,000 a year. How is it that you have $30 million in your bank account? Kind of a thing. Anyway, they did not care how much their money cost them. But every Christian knows that there are some things which cost too much. I mean, a Christian is supposed to be so far opposite of this that a Christian should be willing to lose money rather than accept it dishonestly. Okay? And it's definitely an elder. A man named Newt Larson wrote in a commentary, the person and the attitude towards money, such a person, and he's talking about a candidate for elder, will have a detachment from wealth and its distractions. He will be an example of generosity and faithful dependence on God. His goals and decisions will not be influenced by paychecks and benefits. Instead, a pastor has only, and he's using that in the correct term, correct way, a pastor has only one devotion, one treasure, God himself, right? So someone that wants to be an elder, it's like any other public service job. You're not getting in it to make money, right? Any thoughts on that?
I guess I better cancel the casino night. You guys, I was gonna invite you all to.
Say again?
I said,
I'm sorry.
no, I said,
I miss the punchlines all the time.
no, I said, I guess I should cancel the casino night. I was
Oh.
gonna invite you all to.
Yeah, probably a good idea.
I don't know, some things you can relate to better than others, like you can see why certain things are tempting and you understand, and other things kind of leave you cold, and I guess that's just that born with personality. This doesn't really speak to me as something that's enticing, but there's plenty of examples all over the New Testament of this type of stuff. I mean, you immediately think about Judas pilfering money from the bag. But what was it? Was it Felix that keeps Paul in prison for 2 extra years just because he's like hoping that maybe he'll get some money out of the situation? And there's just example after example of people who are motivated in this way. Ananias is, well, they wanted more reputation, I would imagine, but yeah.
Well, it was a mix,
Yeah.
because they wanted to hold back.
But they wanted that Barnabas.
Yeah, they wanted to have it both.
We actually had an incident when we were at Northside. There was a couple, he was an investment guy, and he wanted everybody to invest in some place in Africa that they were gonna build a resort. And one of the members worked there, and when they were putting their prospectus together, they were just kind of throwing this thing together and getting money in there, and it really did cause a rift. Whether what he was doing was shady or not or whatever, but it can cause trouble.
Yeah.
There's a good, speaking of the generality to all Christians, so I know that I'd have to look it up, but one thing that early Christians were actually prized for by pagans was as managers, stewards, and people in business, their government, because they were considered to be just kind of above reproach in terms of honest dealing with money. You knew if you had a Christian that they weren't going to be stealing or pilfering or messing with the scales. And that's kind of recorded in secular history. So
Yeah.
at least early on.
Curtis.
This kind of discussion always brings me back to part of one of Jesus' teachings when he was on the mount, which was the teaching on worry, that an elder should really kind of exemplify this idea that we shouldn't worry about the material things we have now, but to put trust in God that he'll provide for us.
Yeah.
So an elder should really kind of embody this whole teaching of
Yeah.
not caring about, or not worrying, I suppose is a better word for it, for the physical things that we provide or what you will gain out of it, but instead put more trust in the Lord, and we should be that example for it.
Right. That's a good point. And putting it together with so many of the other things we've said about, the common sense, and we've made the point clear that being a good businessman is not a qualification for being an elder. And even though the scriptures don't use this word, the idea of being a good father, I think, comes into play. Just having common sense. You can't really be a good father, I think, if you don't have good common sense as well. And carrying that into the congregation, just using common sense, whether you're a businessman for a living or not, if a bunch of people want to do something like, I don't know, a new church building or whatever that's going to cost several $1 million, and you're like bringing in $4,000 or $5,000 a month in your contributions, then I say, well, we can't do that, and we trust God to make us get by like we're getting by right now. I don't know if that made sense or not. Let me.
It says in that passage in Matthew that the Lord knows what we need, that we only need to pray to him and he'll provide for us.
Right.
That he cares more for us than he does for the birds of the sky or the flowers of the field.
Exactly. I just have a couple. I think we can finish. So 1 Timothy 6 kind of describes an attitude that and it's kind of along what Curtis is saying right now. Godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into the world, and we cannot take anything out of the world. But if we have food and clothing, with these we will be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation, into a snare, into many senseless and harmful desires that plunge people into ruin and destruction. For the love of money is the root of all kinds of evils. It is through this craving that some have wandered away from the faith and pierced themselves with many pangs. I want to focus on just a couple of words here. Okay, let me just say this right off. Money is a tool, right? Money is a tool. And like any tool, it can be used well or it can be abused, right? A hammer can be used to drive nails. A hammer can be used to kill somebody, right? I mean, any tool can be used correctly and for its purpose, or it can be abused. I want to focus on the word desire, okay? Desire. The Greek word is boulomai, all right? And it translates to purpose or intention, but it's a little more than that. It's not just mere will, but will with premeditation. In other words, you are occupied. Your every waking thought is money. How am I going to make money? I got to get some more money, 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 money. Okay, that's kind of the idea that he's talking about there. The other one, you've probably heard lots of lessons on this, the love of money. Again, it's not the money itself. Sometimes preachers or teachers get a little off topic there. It's the love of money. And in fact, in Greek, philurgia, that is all, those three words are combined in that you can't separate, in other words, money from love in the Greek word. It's a connected idea. Love of money, okay? And other translations for that would be avarice or greed. And Jesus spoke about that when he said, you cannot serve God and money. That's an Aramaic word, mamonas, or mamonas. And I like the translation of it. The treasure a person trusts in. That's the literal definition of mammon. The treasure a person trusts in. Okay? So when you trust in a material treasure, you cannot put your trust in God like you're supposed to. Oh, I need to do a better job marking my notes, don't I? I had that. Any thoughts, closing thoughts?
But this put a lot more context into when Jesus says you can't serve God and mammon at the same time. Now I know kind of what mammon actually means in that context.
Okay. And again, and I'm not wanting to leave with the impression, there is nothing wrong with wanting to take care of your family. That's the responsibility, right? Husbands, and fathers have a responsibility to take care of the family, right? But it was with everything in our Christian life, it's got to be about a balance, right? About a balance. A man that wants to be an elder, his balance can't tip too far towards making money, right? Because that leads to problems and all the other qualifications that we've talked about so far.
Also has to do with why.
Pardon?
It also has to do with why you want to have money. If you want to have money because it makes you feel powerful or important, then that's not right. If you want to have money so you can help others, well then or take care of your family,
Yeah.
that's appropriate.
Okay, we'll leave it there because I'll keep talking. All right, thank you for your participation. I, off the top of my head, don't know what the topic is next week, but it'll be the elder and his reputation.